Defining learning goals. One of your projects for this week is to define your own personal learning goals for this course. And to help you do that, I want to share with you some of the thinking behind the learning goals for this course as a whole. And in so doing, to share a little bit about some of the theoretical framework that underlines the way this course is organized and some of the ideas that are sort of built into the design of the course and the design of the learning goals. And then at the end of this presentation, I will talk briefly about the shape of the overall project that you will be doing, the 4-week learning unit. So RET 7372 is really focused on how we use multimedia to do 4 things: to enhance instructor presence and interaction, to deliver instructional content, to assign multimodal projects and invite our students to compose multimodally, and finally to deliver feedback to our students in a way that goes beyond just written comments in the margins of their papers. So those are the 4 primary things we are practicing and learning how to do with multimedia. Now, the first one and the last one are all about humanizing our courses, right? Think of Michelle Pacansky-Brock and her wonderful interactive infographic. These are ways we can humanize our courses so that it's more than just a website. It actually becomes a human community. Instructional content and multimodal assignments relate to the goal of purposefulness, using multimedia for a pedagogical reason. And then underlying all of this is the concept of user experience and user-centered design, which is a whole discipline unto itself, but can really help us understand what are the most effective ways to use multimedia and what are the most effective ways to design a learning experience that actually works for our students. Now, let me elaborate a little bit more on what I would call the kind of conceptual framework that defines the way this course is organized. At the bottom, the foundation is learning science. We know a lot today about how people learn. We've learned this from technologies that have developed around brain mapping and imaging technologies that allow us to literally see what happens to people's brains when they're reading and watching videos and learning, and what cognitively what's going on, neurologically what's going on. We also know a lot from user experience design of experiments and work that people like Richard Mayer have done to really teach us what works and what doesn't in terms of how people learn. So obviously that's the deep foundational layer of the class, is really, hopefully, if we're designing an effective experience for our students using multimedia and other tools in an online class, we are basing that on, it would be really helpful to design it around the way that people actually learn. And one of the things that we have come to discover is that people don't really remember much if they're just reading. So one of the key goals of this course is obviously to expand beyond a model of learning that is just text-based and to incorporate multimedia. That's clearly one of the primary goals and one of the arguments that I'm going to make as I push all of you to think visually and to think using multimedia is, to think about people learn in other ways than just reading a bunch of words on the page. On top of that, then, as the kind of second deep layer or the foundation of this course is user experience design. We know a lot today about how people experience online text and online media. We know where they go on web pages, where their eyes go when they're looking at a web page, where they click, where they stick, where they bail. We've learned a great deal from both commercial and university research around user experience design, how people actually, what actually works for people, what's going to be useful for them, what's not going to be useful for them, what's distracting, what's effective. And so that kind of layers on top of the learning science foundation. And then we have the 3 main pillars of this course: accessibility, presence and interaction, and course design. And you will see those 3 pillars reflected in the 3 sets of learning outcomes for the course. We have 5 primary learning outcomes for each of these 3 pillars: accessibility, presence, interaction, and course design. So those basically form the structure, right? Those are the 3 things that we need to be able to do well. We need to make our content accessible. We need to build presence and interaction into the course. And we need to come up with a design that actually works in a tangible way based on what we know about user experience and what we know about learning. And then finally, on top of that, is the actual instructional text and media, which is how we present the learning to our students. So you could think of that purple bar on the top as that's the actual course website. that's actually what's visible to our students. That's what they see when they log into our class, is that top layer. Everything underneath is more or less invisible to them, but it forms the principles that shape the ways we design learning environments and experiences. So this is somewhat abstract in this model, but this is my attempt to represent the kind of thinking that underlies the way this course is designed and the way that I think you can use some of the tools and concepts and practices in this course in your own teaching, to think about, what can I build on about what I know about learning? How do I develop user experience design principles? And then how do I build accessibility, presence, interaction, and course design into the materials, so that when someone comes into my class, they think, wow, this is a really friendly website. This is really clear. I really understand. It looks very clean and simple to me. And they begin to think, we make it look easy because it's done well. But actually, there's a whole lot of stuff going on beneath the surface there, right? You could think of this, if I use the image of an iceberg, the visible part is the purple stuff at the top. Everything else is the 5/6 or 6/7 or whatever that is beneath the surface that is invisible to people. It's the conceptual structure that is built into the material that appears to people when they come into our course websites and actually engage with the text and media that we have presented to them. So that's the conceptual framework. Okay, now in terms of the way the course works kind of on a weekly basis, you will very quickly discover that there's a method to this, and I like to call it reflective practice. And the way it works is this. We start with theory. Let's say Richard Mayer, Instructional Guidelines for Producing Effective Multimedia. So you read and you get these concepts like the signaling principle and the redundancy principle and a whole bunch of theory. Then we're immediately going to put that into practice by doing something. We're going to make something, make a video, make a website, define criteria, do something practical and applied. And then we reflect on that, sometimes on the discussion board, sometimes in other ways, but basically say, all right, we had the theory, we put it into practice. What did we learn? What worked? What didn't work? We take the reflection and those takeaways and feed it back into the theory and say, okay, now I have a better understanding of what Richard Mayer means by the signaling principle. I understand better what Beth Hewitt means about writing an effective assignment or whatever. But it becomes this kind of circle where we are taking theory, putting it into practice, reflecting on what we learned, feeding that back into theory, and so forth. So by the end of this course, you will have learned some concepts, some why. You will also have done some practice and some how, and then you've done some reflection to think about, all right, what does this mean for me? What are my personal takeaways? So that's the sort of rhythm that ideally, if it works right, is built into the way the assignments and the weekly sort of projects work together. There's always going to be some sort of attempt on my part to help you see these connections, to put theory into practice and then reflect on it, and then to feed back into some greater understanding about some of those concepts. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about the main project, because really this course is all about making one thing. A 4-week online unit focused on teaching students how to complete a multimodal assignments. For those of you who have finished 7371 lately, it's very parallel to what you did there. We're going to build this unit step by step. By the end of the course, you will have a living, breathing website in Google Sites that includes some text and some media, your assignments, and everything in between to help those students get there. So you're basically building 1/3 or 1/4 of an online class. And reflecting on it each step of the way, piece by piece. So what we begin with is the assignment itself. You present the assignment. It's a multimodal assignment prompt. That's where we're starting. It says, dear students, I want you to complete a blank assignment. So you give them the actual prompt that tells them the instructions for what they're doing, provide some examples, link the assignment to some learning outcomes and help your students understand why they're doing this, and explain how they will be evaluated using a rubric. So we kind of start there. Then we think about, all right, at the end of this 4-week unit, my students are going to be submitting their completed assignment. So I need to give them assignments or the instructions for how to do that, right? Post it as a Google Docs file and link to it, the same thing we normally do. Tell them technically, literally, practically how to submit the assignment. Then comes the creative part, the journey, the map in between, as Julie Dirksen would say, the arc, the learning path from Here's the assignment. You are going to do X. Here's the completed assignment. You have done it. Now we have to build everything in between. It would take up 4 weeks of a class. That's where we're going to put instructional media, activities and assessment, all of the scaffolding and all of the steps that our students are going to need to get from point A, where they have been handed the new assignment, to point B, where they turn around and hand it back to you in a completed and revised form. So that's sort of the shape that this project takes. And again, we're going to build this step by step, piece by piece. You'll get feedback from each other and from me along the way. And I think it will be a lot of fun. And we get to do something that we don't get to do in a live class, which is, get feedback on stuff before the student turns in the paper and you go, oops, I guess I didn't explain that very well. I got back a bunch of gobbledygook because my assignment prompt was actually really vague. So we get to do a lot of feedback and a lot of, talking about what we're doing and revising as we go along. But that's sort of the shape of the course in terms of how that main project is designed and how it will be delivered and developed over the next 7 weeks. Okay, so I hope this gives you a little bit of background and reveals a little bit about the way I have tried to think theoretically and conceptually about the goals of the course and the reasons behind the way it's structured the way it is. Good luck defining your own personal learning goals, and I look forward to reading what you have to say. Thanks for listening.